Hello, friends. In this episode, I sit down with Calvin Wayman. Calvin grew up in an extreme fundamentalist Mormon group, which he identifies as a cult. His story is fascinating, and this episode was all about his fight for freedom. It was an incredible story, and we dive deep into what does it mean to grow up in a cult, to be in a cult, and how he became aware that it was what it was and was able to eventually leave, and his journey of healing. So it was a really honest and raw and riveting episode. I am so excited for you guys to enjoy it. You can connect with Calvin in the description. His links are there. He is host of his own podcast called the Cultured Podcast, and he has a YouTube channel. So go check him out. Go send him some love. Additionally, this episode is brought to you by the Men's Therapy Studio. Are you feeling lost or overwhelmed as you try to navigate your place in this world? Well, you're not alone. The Men's Therapy Studio is here for clients like you trying to figure out the big questions from career, heartbreak, relationships, and who you want to be. We take your challenges seriously in a world that often doesn't. So hop on a free consultation, send an email, or book a session online. And lastly, Patreon is now available for extra content and a community. You can check out the Patreon page, link in the description. And guys, enjoy the episode. There's so many more episodes available on Spotify and other platforms as well. So enjoy and subscribe.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking to therapists because they psychoanalyze people, and I've done that myself. Like, I've done a lot of therapy. Thank God for therapy, but also just therapist friends being like, I'm trying to work out, because every once in a while I feel like I have to step out of my own life and then look at it and be like, okay, how did I probably pick up something based on the environment that I'm in, and now I'm so out of it. Like, therapists have given me some really cool insights of
That's so
like
interesting.
what's probably happening and what that's doing to my brain. Like, so yeah, I always love talking to therapists.
Yeah. So I really want to get into that because, you grew up, you identified as a cult, and I want to understand what that means for you. And I know that it's some type
It's a strong word.
Yeah, it's a strong word. And it's also, like you said, it's a branch of Mormonism or a
Yeah.
fundamentalist Mormon group. And I
Yeah.
want to understand what makes your community different from I guess regular Mormonism, which would not be a cult, let's say.
Yeah. Well, it depends on who you ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people say that is a culture.
Yeah.
The thing, I mean, it took me a long time before I was even open to call it a cult. I certainly didn't call it a cult when I was in it. And even when I left, I still didn't call it that. But as I've been out and being like, okay, what are things that make things culty? And I think that's a healthier way of looking at it, is like cultiness, because it's a spectrum. You can slide up and down it. Like, something can be cult-like or culty, and you can have a cult that's pretty culty because they're worshiping the dude that's in charge and that you can't leave. But then it can even go even more extreme. It's like you gotta have, tattoos or blood sacrifices, consecrate your entire material, and that's even more culty. So it can slide up and down. But something you just asked, the difference between fundamentalist Mormonism and Mormonism.
Yeah.
This is a good question because a lot of people don't recognize the tie. A lot of Mormons, or LDS as they call themselves now, I mean, they've always been called LDS, but there's been this strange push that they don't want to call themselves Mormon, even though literally the book that Joseph Smith created is called the Book of Mormon, and they called themselves Mormon for so long. But anyway.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, do you think there's a reason for that?
PR. Because Mormonism, for the longest time, if you look at, in fact, Johnny Harris, we were talking about Johnny Harris right after this, he did a really cool documentary around the history of Mormonism, on how there's been especially since early 1900s, they've been more and more trying to brand themselves as a primary Christian faith, and they technically are, like Jesus is there, but there's also some very unique things that make it very different than typical Christianity. Where was I going with that? Hold up. There was something I was gonna say about that. Oh, the why they don't want to be called Mormons, from the image of what we think of when we think of Mormonism. because with Mormonism, there's like polygamy and stuff like that. And they're like, we're not polygamous. And they like there to be this separation, especially from who they are and fundamentalist Mormons. But to just dive deep, the difference or the sameness. Regular Mormons used to be synonymous. If you talk to a regular LDS member now, they're going to be like, nobody believes in polygamy anymore. That was something we did way back then. Joseph Smith, the founder of all of Mormonism, was a polygamist. His successors, Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, all of these prophets of the LDS Church, of the whole movement, were polygamists. Not only were they polygamists, they taught it as a doctrine, as a tenet just as important as any tenet, that this is what you have to do to get to the highest kingdom. In Mormonism, there's tiers of heaven. And to get to the highest, known as the celestial kingdom, you must live this way. It was a commandment of God. This is how you must live. That's important context, because a lot of LDS members today, and it's not always their fault, because there's been such a shift over the last 100 years to make it feel like it was not a commandment, and it was. Somewhere along the way, so where did the split happen? Where it's all the same thing, and now there's a distinction between LDS Church and fundamentalism. Well, the LDS Church was having a lot of strain, let's call it, with the federal government in the late 1800s, early 1900s for the practice of polygamy. The federal government, just the simple version, they did not like it. It was barbaric as far as they were concerned. It was like akin to slavery as far as they were concerned. And they kept putting more and more pressure on the LDS Church, to the point where they created laws against the LDS Church. They started confiscating church property for their practice. And so now there's a lot of this pressure on the church. What are we going to do? Is this a doctrine? It's now been multiple generations since the founder had passed, and the prophet at the time, Wilford Woodruff, got a revelation from God that polygamy is no longer required. Now, when he did that, they had a generation of very deep, faithful, believing members that remember Joseph Smith, that remember Brigham Young, and remember the fiery sermons like, this is the only way you're going to get to the celestial kingdom. And so they were like, they're just doing this for the federal government. It created this double life, like this double standard. In fact, there literally was a double standard in the sense that the LDS Church publicly said one thing, we're not doing polygamy anymore. Privately, we're still polygamists. But then the federal government got word of that, and they were like, no, you guys are still living polygamy. And long story short, they ultimately says, no, we're actually done away with it. In fact, we're excommunicating members that are practicing polygamy. And that's what happened. This is the part that a lot of LDS members, even today, don't know. My ancestors were kicked out of the LDS Church for being faithful to what their leaders taught them. That's where fundamentalist Mormonism comes from. Because LDS Church people try to separate themselves like, we're so different, they're weird, they're culty, we're not a cult. But what they do not understand is that the organization they're part of birthed the fundamentalist movement by excommunicating their most faithful members, and by faithful meaning the ones that were most saying, this is what we've been told is the right thing by our own leaders, we're going to live it. And it was a huge sacrifice because they loved their mother church. They loved it, and they're like, well, we have to live this way. And they were confused at the time too. Like, is this a public stunt? And so they were kicked out. And they were like, well, Joseph Smith said that we have to live this way. So I guess we're the ones that are carrying it on. And so from fundamentalist Mormons from that day, it's been their mission to carry on the true tenets of Mormonism as discussed, as revealed. Now, obviously, I'm zoomed out of this enough that I think a lot of it, if not all of it, is like nonsense, and that Joseph Smith is not who I was taught that he was and stuff like that. But just from a human level, I look at my ancestors and people, they're just faithful members that have been living what they had been taught and believed in their bones was the right way to live. That's the separation. That's what it is when it comes down to it.
Yeah. First of all, that's such a fascinating story. I'd imagine, though, once this split happens, probably people become more extreme and fervent and
100%. That's what we're saying. There's been,
Right.
And then there's been more extreme versions of that split since. Because think about what fundamentalists are. Fundamentalists are, we're the true ones left. Everybody else doesn't have it. We're the true ones for God. And so there has been multiple split offs within fundamentalism, because fundamentalism, it happens again where they're like this, which is something that Joseph Smith actually taught. And there's a disagreement between little factions within that fundamentalist group, and then splits happen again. There's actually so many little splits, which isn't surprising. The same thing happened in Christianity. Like there's a lot of different split offs over minute details, and that's happening to this day. There's the whole fundamentalist Mormon movement, but within that, there's like dozens and dozens of little churches with like 100 members, 2,000 members, maybe 20,000 members, but most people have never heard of. Like my church was a church of 2,000 members. It's not that big.
So, wow, only 2,000 of you.
In this particular one. The whole movement is estimated to be like 60 to 80,000, which still isn't that much. But yeah.
That is bizarre. So, I mean, talk to me. In the way that you're growing up, like what to you seems like this was really a cult? Like you were being forced to do stuff.
You mean when I was in it growing up? There was no aspect of it.
Like, what to you looking back now?
When I was in it growing up, there was zero aspect of it that felt culty to me.
Okay, interesting, because this was your upbringing.
This is what I knew. Like, I understood that we had the true truth. This is what we were totally expected to... I'll give a modern day viewpoint of what it did for me psychologically, but we knew that we were going to have people tell us that we were wrong, that there was an outside world, that there was other fundamentalist groups that we were going to have disagreements on. But that ultimately came down to us just believing ours more, because we were like, of course they're going to think that way because they're fighting against the truth. So if I analyze that now, like you and I met at a really cool conference, and one of the conferences, just for the listeners, it's an event for like debate, questioning things, philosophy, called Dissident Dialogues. And
really
one of the things that I recognize now that the environment turned off is this healthy part of human called skepticism. You know, skepticism isn't necessarily pessimism. You need to be able to question things. And the way I was raised, anything that was a question was turned into fighting against God. And so you don't want to fight against God. So what does that do? You want to be a good person. You don't want to fight against God. So when you hear question inputs, we just branded them as like, oh, they're anti-God. They're anti-Mormon. And so it just creates this environment of insularity, of like just staying within these bounds, and everybody like groupthink to the nth degree. That's what was created. Again, I didn't see that when I'm in it. When you're in it, you're just like, you feel cozy, you feel safe, you feel there's this big evil outside world. There's these diluted other fundamentalist Mormon churches, the regular LDS church, they've been They apostatized from the truth like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And we're the only ones left. We're the reason the world is even still spinning, because God is such a merciful God. He's letting everything, like he wants to destroy everybody for the evil, but God, he lets rain fall on the wicked just like he does on good. And so he's letting everything last because we're it. We're the only ones left. Like, so we truly believed, and they still do. They still believe it. Like, it's so strange for me when I go back. I just went back for the first time in a long time. Unfortunately, a family member passed, but it's just, I got to feel it now after being out for a while. And it's like, there's so much, it feels so fake right now to me after being out. Because you can just see, that you see the conformity, and then the posing of freedom in it, of like, oh, I'm free to choose what God wants for me. And, you know, I could do whatever I want, but I'm going to do this. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack. It's probably going to take me years to fully unpack it.
All right. I mean, what's bizarre to me and what's really incredible is like you could be in it as a kid and it's so real and you're so invested. And there are all these real amazing things that it does for you, like that feeling of safety, being part of that community. You know, and it is real, you know, but then looking back at it after getting your space, you're like, this is completely fake.
Yeah, because the thing that I think is real is that sense of safety. This is what I look at now that I'm like, there's so many things that I think it hijacks real things. For example, everybody's had this thing where they feel in their gut some sort of truth. There's something that is meaningful. What my church would say is, because you're in this church and because you've been blessed with the priesthood, if you're a male, because women can't have the priesthood, but if you're a male and you get that feeling, it's because you're in the line of your duty, you're following God, you have what's called the Spirit of the Holy Ghost, and that's why you know that truth. What I now know, you've had that feeling, my other friends that have never even heard of Mormonism have had that feeling. When you're in it, you think I have this because of this. There's so many things like this. Like people, if a kind act happens in my church, they think that the rest of the world is evil. There's not human kindness because they turn on the news and they do see evil things happening. But they're like, this is here because we're doing God's thing. And there's like a hijacking of, I've seen so much human kindness from strangers living in this big, evil, wicked city, what my family would call New York City. Like, I've seen so much human kindness, like just somebody hungry and somebody that, like a stranger being like, hey, I just bought these groceries, but here, I can buy other groceries. I'm going to give you this bag of groceries. Like, just stuff that really touches me. And I that's what I see is like, there are real things, but when you're in that, there's almost like a hijacking of it and saying it's because of us. It's because you're here. Whereas actually it could just be who you are deep down as the human that you are.
Talk to me about when you start waking up to this, to realizing like this is not the right way. And I also want to understand, like, I think when people say a cult, you know, it often connotates like this extreme way of thinking, this extreme living.
Well, extreme living, we haven't talked about my family dynamics yet, or siblings. Should we go there?
Yeah, we should go there. And I feel like also like the manipulation and the abuse.
Yeah.
Like, what was going on there that to you was like, this is legitimately a cult?
A lot of little things. Usually, okay, we usually I've started interviews with this, but we haven't gone there. So I grew up with 4 moms. So my dad was a polygamist. My grandfather was also a polygamist. He had like 11, 12 wives. Polygamy was the norm. And because polygamy was the norm, having a lot of kids was the norm. I'm going to say the line that you said actually off air, that you said that's interesting. I'm the 11th. I'm the 11th child. And this was the thing that you said over, and I'm one of the older kids. That's something you don't hear very often. I'm the 11th child, and I'm one of the older kids. I actually have 44 siblings.
Wow.
So if we're looking for extreme, There we go. There's one. And we grew up in one house.
Interesting. Wow.
So all in one house,
Mm.
5 parents, 45 of us total.
I'm thinking, where'd you guys sleep?
On bunk beds. We ultimately built an addition to the house. We needed one as the family was growing larger. And once we did that, and we went from like having 3 bedrooms to like 13 bedrooms in the house, that definitely helped. So me and myself and like 4 of my other brothers like lived in the same room, and I graduated from bunk bed to just like a bed in the same room.
Mm.
So yeah, there was like a main room that was like all the girls, like a dormitory or something. Like this is the girls' room area and this is the boys' room. Like that was the bulk of it.
Mm.
And then the older kids got to eventually start getting their own individual room. And then of course all the parents had their own room. But yeah, there was a primary girls' room, a primary boys' room, and then like just a smattering of older siblings that got to have their own space, which I got to have when I was 19. It was huge. I was like, I got to have my own room.
Bro,
Yeah.
this blows my mind.
Yeah.
Legitimately blows my
But
mind.
to answer your question as far as like when I started to
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah.
Oh, you like this because we just went to this event. And
Yeah.
at this event, philosophy was a big thing. So there's 2 big things that made me start to finally doubt. One I call the crack, and one when I left the bubble. So the crack, where did the crack happen? I'm the only sibling that went to college.
Mm-hmm. Was college unaccepted? Like unacceptable?
Yeah, by and large, especially in my family. Some people in the church thought it was a good idea, but it was very much frowned upon because we had heard these horror stories of people that went to college and then left the religion. Now you have to understand, how dare they? It is terrifying. Like you have to understand the dynamic when you're in it. The thought of leaving and the thought of never making it back is viewed as one of the most horrifying things you could ever do as a human, because it means the devil won. You're on this battle for your soul, and we're here to gain experience, and we're hoping that in this life we chose all the right things so that we can keep on progressing, not only go to heaven, but in Mormonism, you can keep on progressing after death to someday be a god yourself. And so
that's such a cool concept, by the way.
And so we've got 2 major extremes. Become a god, or give in to the lusts of your flesh and someday be damned to hell and burn in hell for eternity, right? And so somebody that went to college and didn't make their way back to the church, they're burning in hell forever. Like that's a very scary thing. And so parents were very cautious, let's say, with sending their kids to college. But I have to credit my upbringing in a way that made me want to go to college, because I was always very curious. We got a computer when I was like 6 years old. I was to help us with our homeschooling, and I became obsessed with computers and learning things. And I eventually graduated high school from home, worked in my dad's construction company for 4 years, realized I hate this. I want to use my brain more than my hands, and I want to keep on learning. Besides, our prophet Joseph Smith said, man is saved no faster than he gains knowledge. And so essentially, I convinced my dad and my grandfather, who was one of the church leaders, I convinced them to let me go. It took a while. My dad didn't like the idea. He had me go talk to my grandfather. When I talked to my grandfather, he was like, I don't know. And then he asked, what do you want to go for? And I said, business. And as soon as I said business, he was like, oh, like most of my family's in construction. You know how when you're young, everybody's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And kids are like an astronaut or, a doctor. For my family, every single person in the Wayman family, we're in some sort of trade, some construction trade. So my choices were like, Calvin, what are you going to be? Are you going to be a plumber? Are you going to be a framer? Are you going to be an electrician? like, are you going to do cement work? Like, that was it, right?
Mm.
And I hated construction. And so I wanted to get out and do more business stuff. And when I said that to my grandfather, he was like, yeah, it's probably a good idea if somebody from the community understands business. And so that was my in. Now, how does that lead to the crack? Well, and he gave me some stipulations. Like, he was like, go to classes, go home. Don't stay on campus. Don't go to any... Go ahead.
I want to understand, at this point, you still fully believe?
100%. 100%. 100%. I had no doubt in my mind. Like, I wanted to go... Like, I had a sense of adventure. That's for sure. Like, right. I knew I wanted to... Like, a whole other story for probably a different day is, like, just my teenage years and how I had this longing for individuality, because there wasn't a lot of it in my upbringing. Like, there were so many things that I did to, like, it was this mix of wanting to be unique but also be accepted, and and set myself up for the long run. Like, I didn't want to be like everybody else, all of my brothers. Like, I wanted to have something different. I wanted to lean into my strengths. And out of all of my brothers and many of my siblings, I loved learning shit. I loved math. I loved algebra. I ultimately fell in love with calculus. Like, I loved learning, and I wanted to lean in that, not just building stuff, which I can do that too, but I wanted to learn. And so
I find it hilarious that you love algebra and math.
I think it helped. Want to know what? Because, I mean, something we were saying earlier, I think we're like, maybe you didn't quite say this, but yeah, we have to, there's our gut, but then there's things we have to do to check our gut. You got to have rationality and logic. And I think it was actually my love for computers and math that trained my brain. This is just me post-mortem analyzing my life, that gave me some of the skill set to question things and not just take it wholesale and be like, does this actually make sense? Now, though, going back to college, keep in mind, I'm a fundamentalist Mormon boy, and we were taught to not tell anybody. Like,
that you're fundamentalist, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they can't know. Because, well, my ancestors spent time in prison for their beliefs because they were polygamists. Polygamy became illegal. After Mormonism, after the LDS Church kicked out fundamentalist Mormons, they kept doing things more and more to try to separate themselves from fundamentalists. First, they told the federal government, we're not doing any more fundamentalist marriages. Then they said, we actually did a revelation against polygamy. Then they were like, look, we actually kicked out members. Then they actually started prosecuting. So Utah, where I'm from, is a very Mormon state. It was actually, settled by my Mormon pioneer ancestors. And so there's a lot of legislative Mormon influence. And so laws were passed against fundamentalists that you couldn't, like, one of them that finally got broken down like just a few years ago was this cohabitation law, where people could be put in jail. Guys could be just by living in the same house as other women. And they had to create a law like that because they weren't technically married to 4 women or 12 women. They were married to one, and then they had a spiritual marriage to the rest. And so the Mormon church legislature tried to find out some ways to still prosecute those fundamentalists. So they created this bigamy law, they called it, or this cohabitation law, where they could put people in jail. And they did. I have family members on both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, that spent jail time for no other reason except they were polygamists.
So they were put in jail by LDS members or by the police?
By the police, but guess who was the police?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
The whole Mormon, I mean, it's funny now, like, even to this day, we're in 2024, it's been forever. Utah is still one of the, if not the most strict alcohol laws like alcohol states, for example. Why? Because alcohol is forbidden in Mormonism. And so it's very difficult to get your hands on alcohol. Like, there's all of these rules, like you can't order it unless you're eating food with it. Like, there's very strict hours on when you can, like when a liquor store is open. There's not regular alcohol in like a gas station or a grocery store like there is anywhere else in America. And it's because of that Mormon influence. But all this ties back to why I never told anybody. We were raised then to be very secretive because we don't want our dad to go to jail. We don't want our moms to go to jail. So when I go to college, who did I tell that I was a polygamist? Child? Zero. No people. Like, I was there to learn. I was by myself. I did not talk to a lot of people. But where does the crack happen? Where does the doubt start? Yes, to your question, I totally believed it. And even though I was going for business, you have to take general education. Part of general education, I had to take a philosophy class. It was a single story of philosophy. So to tie back to the event that you and I met at, with there's like philosophical discussion and stuff, it was Plato's allegory of the cave. There was this story of Plato's allegory of the cave. I don't think I'll share the whole story, but essentially the punchline of the story is this person's in a cave. My professor asked, are they sad? And I said, yeah, they're in a cave. She's like, but that's all they know. Why would they be sad? And I was like, oh, they have nothing to compare it to. Interesting. And one day, one of the people breaks loose from the chains. They were chained and looks behind a back wall and sees that there's this, one of the key features of the story is these shadows appear in the wall in front of them. Everybody in the cave argues about the shadows. They think that's ultimate reality. And so when this person breaks free from the chains, looks behind the back wall, sees that the shadows are actually being created by somebody holding up shapes in front of a flame, blows his mind, says, holy shiz, his whole reality shattered. Then he sees a crack in the wall, goes out and he leaves the cave. So if his mind was blown when he saw that this shadow of a tree is not fake because it's somebody holding up a shape of a tree, then he sees a real tree. So his entire identity, everything, his whole worldview was just shattered in an instant. Very painful, terrifying. But then he's like, well, this is kind of cool. Like, there's so much more to life than I thought. And he realizes, I still have my loved ones, my friends and family down there. So he goes back to the cave. His eyes have adjusted to light. He stumbles. They think he's gone blind. He's like, no, I'm good. He's trying to tell them, like, what's out there. Now, they've never been out of the cave. So when he's telling them about things he's seen, like, what are they think he's gone crazy because they have no frame of reference. And then finally somebody says, what could be better than the shadows? Like, the shadows are so amazing. He's like, the shadows are nothing compared to what's out there. And they're like, what? Are you saying our shadows are not? Are you trying to take away our shadows? And because they feel threatened, they kill him. So that's the fast version of the story. Now, I hear that story and I'm just like, that's a cool story. But then my professor asks, okay, who are you in the story? And I'm just reflecting on that. So what does that mean? Now, keep in mind an important thing to know about my personality up to this point. Why did I go to college? Why did I like math? I loved truth. I was taught that we had the truth. It's why I was in the religion. It's why we were with my church and not the LDS church. I was in love with what is true. And we always talked against other people that they like what's comfortable more than truth. That's why they're not in our church. They would rather be with the fake Mormon church, the LDS church, and not with the truth, because it's easier to be LDS and not face persecution. It's way harder to be in ours, but we love truth. So and I went to college to continue to learn more truth. And my professor asks, can you honestly say that you love truth? And so I perk up and I'm like, yeah. And she asks, are you willing to leave everything you've ever known in pursuit of it? Or how do you know that you're not in a cave right now? What if everything you think? What if everything you think is truth is just a projection from something else. And what you think is truth is really just shadows on the wall. And there was just something in that question where something clicked in a terrifying way, where I was like, wait a minute. I realized that moment that there wasn't a single thing in my life up to that point. There wasn't a single thing that was a tangible, important core aspect of my life that I had internally discovered. I realized somewhere when she said projection, like I imagined like somebody's holding up the shape and creating the shadow. I was like, holy shit. Everything that I think is true is coming from my dad, my grandfather, the church, the books they tell me to read. Not that that's bad, I realized, but I was like, it was uncomfortable to realize I didn't, like, it was a projection. I couldn't deny that. It was like somebody saying, look at this, read this, look at, like, this is true. I hadn't discovered it. I had never left the cave. And that was the first time in my life, while I was in it, while I truly believed it, that I was like, oh, I don't know if this is. Like, it didn't make me all of a sudden think that this is wrong. I was like, I don't know that it is true, though. Holy shit. That's terrifying. Mm-hmm. That was the crack. Mm-hmm. That was the moment where, for the first time in my life, I'm like, what if this is something different than I think it is? Because I hadn't discovered it myself that it is. Mm-hmm. If I was on the outside looking for truth, would I actually find it? I don't know. Could it be that I love my dad and my grandfather and these other people, and because I love them and they want what's best for me, that I'm taking that on? Whoa. That was where it started.
Wow. Dude, my mind is blown. It was such a real story. I think like I noticed you getting really, emotional about it. And yeah, I want to kind of understand a little more why, like what were those feelings that you're feeling?
It's a mix of things. I just go right back there. And I know how scary it really was for that boy. Because, I mean, it's probably something that I don't even know how to put into words as what makes me feel that way, but it's just the terror of it all, the instant isolation of that moment. Because who could I talk to in that moment? Who could I talk to about that? For that boy? Who? No, like, couldn't talk to my siblings, my parents. Can't. First of all, again, they would have no frame of reference, and I can't have them thinking I'm doubting and that I'm going to be excommunicated. Like, I now know where that comes from, being outside of it, like this very tribal part of us as being humans, and like being kicked out of the tribe was like certain death. And so there's a lot of those trials there. And I guess just knowing the journey, and also just respecting the fuck out of that version of me to dare consider it, knowing where it's leading me to and where I am now. Like, there's just something in it to me that makes me want to give him a hug, like, because it's such a wild, hard to describe journey. And yeah, I don't know, there's just something in it that's like, I'm both saddened for him, but also so grateful for him, for that version of myself, and feeling that terror again, going back there and being like, whoa, because it's so indescribable to have an entire worldview suddenly be questioned, especially in a religion like mine, where this is just a small fraction of like a big eternity we're taught, and it feels like that entire thing is in question. but I'm grateful for it because I actually look at people now that like they have very rigid views of things. And it's what leads to fighting and wars because it's getting threatened and stuff like that. And I get it. It feels threatening. It feels very threatening. And again, like that was just the start of it. And so part of the emotions is probably just knowing how that would kicked off like a whole host of things. But yeah, that's where it started. But the second part, because I said go
Dude,
ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to comment on that. I respect that so much, and I think it's so incredible that you have this like compassion for that younger boy, as you described him, like to be able to literally question everything that you knew up until that point, and to now think like my whole concept of religion and family, like all this might be wrong, and like to be in that space where it's like
And it's
scary.
confusing because I had so much love and respect for my dad and my grandfather, the people that were in it. I didn't want them to be wrong. I wanted it to be right. Like when I had this crack, I wanted it to be right. If I'm being really honest with myself, when that made me want to start studying and leaving the cave, it was with the high hopes that it would be true.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to be.
Wow.
And that was the only consolation. That was literally the conclusion I came to after that terror. I was like, well, if it's true, and I love truth, I got nothing to worry about. Because if it is true, it'll point back to it. And then I'll have that peace knowing that I did discover truth. And I'm not just following projections blindly from dad books and stuff like that. And that's what kicked off the journey of like, okay, yeah, because if it's like I imagined the people that we were like that were deluded, that were in some other religion, some other fundamentalist church that we knew they were wrong, I was like, well, shit, if I was them and I believed in truth, like I would want to know so I could get to the true religion, mine. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to be honest with myself and try to like discover, like if I'm actually looking for what is real, I'm going to find this. And that means, and this was scary, but if I was like, well, if I love truth, I don't have to be scared. It's like, if that means that it's wrong, I have to be willing to leave.
That's so fascinating, dude. Yeah, I mean the balls to stare into the abyss and then just like walk into it.
Yeah, people talk about that, and
You know what I mean?
and again, I have respect for it now because it's like, yeah, that's brave, that's ballsy. But the thing that's interesting, it doesn't feel that way when you're in it, man. Like it doesn't. It's just
Interesting.
like it feels clumsy. It feels messy and not brave. Like it's not this like crusading. Like there is no turning back. It didn't feel brave and courageous at the time. But just to wrap up because I said there was two
Interesting.
things. There was the
Yeah.
crack and then leaving the bubble. After graduating and everything, this other piece, I love truth, but this other thing that I craved, and I understand why I craved it now, but I crave freedom.
Mhm.
I put it as financial freedom. You know, I now view it as like, no, it's because I'm a human being, and there's this. I was under tremendous constraints, and so I left my day job to be an entrepreneur, and that's really where things kicked off. Because when I left my day job in 2015, I left the state for the first time in my life. Packed up a U-Haul with my wife at the time. I had a church-assigned marriage, my 1-year-old at the time, and we went to California for me to do door-to-door sales. You know, and I was going to go be an entrepreneur. And that is really what took the crack and blew it wide open. Because now, like people don't realize how much the environment they're in influences their thought patterns and thinking. And when I was out of it for the first time, I just had such different perspective of the world because I was realizing, wait, even though I knew California was over there from Utah, when I'm in California, it literally felt like I went to a different planet compared to what I was in. And so now I was free to actually ask myself questions. And then I met a lot of cool people. I went to events. Like that was a big thing. It started off with entrepreneurship events, but entrepreneurship events, there's this underlying there's this underlying thing to want to better yourself, progress yourself. And that was a pattern I had from my past. I want truth. I want to improve. That put me in connections with other religious people. And one of the things that was so confusing during this period is I ended up connecting with these religious people that good things were happening to them in their life. And that was confusing because I was taught that the reason good things happened to me or anybody else was because of where we were from, because we had the truth, because God was blessing us. And I'm seeing them give glory to God and good things happen, and they and them in their own faithfulness. And it made me realize, wait a minute, maybe there's more than one way. And what that then made me do is really go from looking externally of what truth is to then looking inward and being like, why do I believe anything? Like, why do I believe that? Why do I want it to be true? Like, what is it in that? And then that is where, I mean, the therapist in me is like, am I believing, like, why does that person that believes in the wrong church, why do they believe it? Because it's comfortable. There's this thing called confirmation bias. It'd be very difficult. How do I know I am not wanting to confirm my own biases and just really looking at and being honest with myself? Why am I believing what I'm believing? If I was on neutral footing and I had options, would I choose this? Would I say this was the truth? And so I was really just on this journey searching. And so I continued to talk. I started to finally open up to people for the first time of where I was from, getting data from that, hearing their reaction, like, whoa, really? And just taking it in and like telling people I trusted for the first time. I started traveling the world. I went to Israel. Israel was a huge thing for me, going to the Western Wall, seeing people that were way more faithful and ardent in their belief than I was. Like, one thing that was so impactful for me is at the Western Wall, I actually captured a Jewish wedding proposal. This video went semi-viral, and I got connected to the couple, and like I partied with them, and then talked with them for like 3 hours that night, and got into their faith. And all this is just making me realize one major thing: there's more than one way, man. There's more than one way, and if there's more than one way, how on earth do I know that mine is the right one? And would I choose it? And so now, for the first time, I'm asking myself, why do I believe this? And what do I believe? Like, because I was like, are there things in my religion that doesn't resonate to my core? And that was a big question, because yes, there were. You spoke of abuse. I don't know how much I want to get into there, but there was plenty of that for myself and against women. Abuse towards any individuality. Certainly no space for anything other than, there wasn't any space for if you were gay, like, and so then I'm asking myself, what side do I want to be on these issues? And realizing, wait, I think I actually believe this. They're saying that you're a bad person if you believe this way. Another one is racism. There was absolutely zero people in my church that were black. Why? Because in my church, black people were cursed. Like, I mean, it's a wild thing to say, but that was the truth. I was raised to think that black people were cursed because of some event that happened in heaven. And then I'm connecting with African Americans. My friend Kevin in San Diego, who was black, he was one of the first people I started to open up with about where I'm from. And then I told him stories that we were told as kids about the African race. And I knew that, like, if we know this story and we're removed from it, it made logical sense to me that the people that should really know something about it is if you are black. I tell him the story. I was like, have you ever, and then I tell him the whole thing. And then I says, have you ever heard that before? He's like, no, that's insane. There's this story in heaven, the curse of Cain, how black people got their black skin, and that there was this war in heaven, And basically, when God was starting the world and the universe, we were all his kids. So Jesus, Lucifer, all of us beings were all God's kids. And he presented it to, he says, we need a plan if we're gonna do this thing called the universe. If you're gonna have bodies, we need to have a plan. And two people came forward: Lucifer, our brother; Jesus, our brother. Jesus gave his plan. Well, Lucifer gave his plan first. That was like, we're gonna create a universe. All the souls are gonna do whatever they want. They can sin. They could be hedonistic. They all get to go to heaven. But I want to have all the honor and glory because that was my idea, God. And so, and then Jesus was like, well, we all get to have a body, but we have to choose between good and evil. If we choose evil, we go to hell. If we choose good, we come back into your presence. But God, you're giving us all life, so I don't want the honor and glory. We still should respect and worship you, God. God's like, I like that idea. God's a jealous God. He chooses Jesus' plan. That makes Lucifer upset. Lucifer creates a fuss. It creates this war in heaven. Everybody has to now choose a side. Are you choosing Jesus' side or Lucifer's side? Anybody that chose Lucifer's side, we kicked Lucifer and all of his followers out of heaven. That becomes hell and all of the demons. Then the people that chose Jesus' side, which was 1/3. So 1/3 went with Lucifer. We kicked him out of heaven. 1/3 was me and you and everybody else that's on this planet that's white. We fought for Jesus. Now, who's the other third? The other third were souls that were like, I don't know, I kind of love God. I kind of love Jesus. I don't know, I also kind of love Lucifer. He's our brother. We can't decide. We don't want to pick. The people, the souls that sat on the fence, God was angry at, and he almost was going to throw them down with Lucifer and say, you're going to be it. But in his infinite mercy, he's like, you know what? I'll be merciful. I'm not going to throw you down to hell, but you can go down, but you're not going to have the same reward as all of these other souls that actually fought in this war for me and Jesus. Those are the black people. So they're cursed with dark skin so that we know who actually in the pre-existence decided to fight for God or not. That's the story that my church still teaches to this day. And yeah, and so when I was talking to my friend Kevin, who's black, I was like, I mean, you got to know that story if it's true. Like, if you're black, you got to, like, this is where I got my skin color. And I was like, he's like, no, that's bullshit. And so then I'm like, oh my gosh. And so now I'm having to ask myself, like, I don't want to think that my friend Kevin is less than, like, that's such bullshit. Like, obviously now, like, being out of it. But there's all these things that are stacking up, and I'm starting to get some individuality of what I want to believe. And then there's just becomes a moment. It becomes so obvious. I'm living in California, and then I come back home to go to church, and I'm noticing humans learn well through contrast. And so now I'm noticing the fear. And I just made this promise to myself that I had to decide how I was going to live the rest of my life. I was 29, and I was like, I have 30 approaching. How am I going to live? Am I going to go deeper into my church? Because I was considering that too. There's a deeper level to the church. Like, there's something in my church called the United Order, and it's for people that are so serious and faithful that they are going to consecrate their entire lives to the church, give up all of their material possessions for the church. So if the church leaders ask for anything from you, your money, your house, you're willing to give it because it's all for God. There was an interview process for that. I was in the interview process, talking to the church leaders. I was about to sign it all over. And then I'm also having this other split side of me, like, do I actually believe this? One of my favorite things that I possess I'm a minimalist, so there's very few things that I'm like, that I need. But one of the things that I'm so glad I have is on my phone, I recorded a voice note of this decision point. where I'm
Mhm.
wrestling and wondering what to choose, and I decide in the moment on the voice note that I'm like, I don't believe this anymore. I'm gonna leave. Anyway, there's a lot that we could also, like, there's a lot of journey that by itself is just the beginning of a story of the journey of like life really starting, making that choice. But that at least is the journey that gets me to that point of, questioning everything, asking myself. And what might be helpful for anybody listening is like the ultimate choice point I come down to is, there's this quote from, I think it's Confucius. And I didn't know this Confucius quote at the time, but it speaks to the essence of what I came to. And the Confucius quote is, every man has 2 lives, and his second life begins when he realizes he has just one. And I started to look at all the things that I knew to be true, not based on a projection now, but based on lived experience. Just like projection, people are like, this is the story of Black people, but then I'm actually interacting with a Black guy, Kevin, and a bunch of others. So I'm like, my direct experience, I have to give more weight to that than somebody else's story. And then realizing I have all the story of the afterlife and the before life. I'm like, okay, I know that, but what do I know more for sure? Like, I hope there's an afterlife, but the thing I know for sure is that I'm here. I know I have this one. Okay. If I know I have this one, what if it's the only fucking one? What if it's the only one? Because that's the one I know is the most real. What am I going to do with it? And when I came to that, I then asked myself, do I want to live the rest of this? Like, I hope there's something after this, but there might not be. I hope there is, fingers crossed. But the one that I know for sure, how do I want to live that? Do I want to live it externally based, meaning what somebody else says is the truth, going back to the Plato story? Or, because there was a big conflict from what I was told is true and my own lived experience and what I was learning and discovering, actually talking to, again, Orthodox Jews and other people in the world and living life. Or do I want to live and judge things and live based on my own internal voice, my own internal values? And that was a big point, because the religion I was in taught against that, because they were like, you're a flawed person. God is infallible. So you need to, the devil can influence you to believe bad things. Like, me even talking to these people was considered a bad thing and considered like dangerous because it's getting on the devil's ground. And so for me to consider to listen to that voice was the height of potential insanity. Because, like, what? Why would you listen to that? Like, who the fuck do you think you are? You think you're smarter than the church leaders, these books? Do you think you're smarter than God? It's like the height of hubris is what it felt like. And so it's like, do I want to live that way, externally or internally? Knowing that it could be hubris, knowing I could be fallible, knowing I could be damning my soul to hell forever. And what I came to on that voice note is, I said, even if that's the case, I have to believe that if there is a God, it doesn't make sense to me that this whole journey I've been on, that somebody that never questioned it and has been on the sofa being a good boy, that they get a better reward than somebody actually, like, God has to know. He has to know that I actually want to know the truth. And if that means that I'm going to hell forever, so be it. I would rather live the rest of my life, because what also felt like hell somehow was just living externally based on what somebody else said, saying this is the truth, do it that way. I'm like, I'm going to die on my own fucking sword. if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
so be it. But if I'm damned, so be it. That's my choice in that choice point. I know I've got one life more than anything else. How do I want to live it? I'm going to live it and judge it and listen to that internal voice for the first time, even if that means I'm wrong. So that was not to get so dramatic, but that's what it was.
Yeah. That story honestly blows my mind. And I want to understand like the healing journey for you.
It's a good thing the healing journey. Yeah, because it's been a process.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny actually. So that I'm wearing this mushroom shirt because I don't know if you're a fan of psychedelics. I'm a fan of psychedelics.
I love psychedelics.
When I made that decision to leave,
Okay.
2 weeks later, I was in Costa Rica on a 7-day ayahuasca retreat. Like, I was like, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I hadn't even done mushrooms yet. I'd never even been high on marijuana, but I had done I'd already been researching it a little bit, and I've heard, like, again, in this seeking for truth, and people have been like, no, there's more to this world than that. And like, I was like, and I also felt that I needed a reset. And so I was like one of the big questions I asked myself, because I didn't know when I left, I was like, what is something that is mine that I can take with me? Like, what is something that's genuinely Calvin that I maybe have had this whole time, but didn't know it because it's clouded by all this stuff. And I wanted to go find it. I wanted to be like, okay, ayahuasca, like not even looking for an extra truth. It was almost like a demolition, like break all the stories and the nonsense. What's something that's me? And that was the beginning of that healing journey. But the one thing, I'll actually share a quick story on ayahuasca because I think that speaks to the healing. On ayahuasca, there's some strange, unexplainable things, but they say come with an intention, and that was my intention. Like, who am I? What am I? What is something that I can actually claim that my soul has that I can build from? And I was given these memories. And how I got the memories was wild, because at first when the visions started coming on ayahuasca, there were these ants blocking my vision. I was like, so what does this mean? Is my brain dirty? There's like bugs in my head. I don't know what it meant. But there's a point to that, because I kept resisting it, and the ants wouldn't leave my vision. And the person that was guiding the ceremony had told us right before we took the medicine that you're going to likely see things where you have one path that's unicorns and honeypots, and the other path is going to be challenging. Like he said, he's like, if you're going to have a path that's good, and then you're going to see your creepy neighbor. He's like, in most choices, you want to go the good path, but on ayahuasca, you want to go to the creepy neighbor. In other words, accept the suck, accept the bad things, because there's a lesson there. And so I remembered that as I was starting to see the vision of the ants. And so instead of resisting them, I finally was like, okay, I'm going to accept these ants somehow. Okay, this seems weird, but I'm accepting them. As soon as I did, the vision starts zooming out, and the ants go from here to like on the ground, and they're in a trail. And I totally knew that they were trying to get my attention to follow them because they're leading me somewhere. And I was like, there was like something in that to me of like the things that we want to avoid are actually a lesson, and they're actually trying to help. And so when I accepted it, they were like, follow me. Because my question is, who am I? What's something that I can claim? And the ants are on the ground. I'm following the ants, and I'm noticing familiarity. My dad built the addition, and my family built the addition when I was like 13. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing this sidewalk that was there before the addition in this vision. I'm like, this is so cool. Like I'm going back in the past. And then the line of ants stops into this pile of ants. And in this pile of ants, right above it, there's this little boy, a 4 or 5-year-old boy on his belly like this, looking at ants. And it was me. And I remember that day. I remember that day. My family was in the house doing something, maybe watching a Disney cartoon in the afternoon. But what was I doing? I wanted to be outside, and I was looking at ants for no other reason except I was curious. And so that was the lesson, the thing that I could take, that something about me or in me that's something I can claim, that curiosity. And that is something that I can take with me, like that I can bank on, that is mine, that I had the entire time. And I can rely on that in this new journey ahead. So that was the beginning of the healing. And then thank God for therapy. I've done a lot of therapy, done a lot of shrooms, a lot of conversations, a lot of journaling, a lot of conversations. The best thing I've ever done for my mental health is move to New York City. You know, people ask me all the time, like, why would you, like, from a small town in Utah, why New York? And this might be a strange thing to say, but maybe not. But New York is the first place I've ever been where I feel like I can fully relax. Finally. I can be myself. I can wear short sleeves if I want. I can find out who I am, and I'm not having people say, do this, talk like that. I'm getting to find myself. And so out of all the things, like, that's been a major one. Like, finally living in a place where I feel like is conducive for who I am as a person.
That's so incredible. It's also ironic because I feel like that wouldn't be true for a lot of other people.
Yeah. And that's okay. That's one thing I've learned. There's not one way. It drives me up the wall when I hear people on Instagram and TikTok and everybody else saying, all men are like this, or their dating advice, women like this. Like, well, when you say women, are you talking about Betsy? Are you talking about Michelle? Are you like, there's different people. When you talk about men, this is what kind of men are you talking about? Are you talking about Joe Rogan as a comedian? Or are you talking about Elon Musk as, like, there's differences. We all have something that's unique. And I don't know. I think people need space for that, to find out who they are and what they're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that open-mindedness and almost humility to recognize that, like, everyone is different and there is more than one way. And even if one way works for one person, doesn't mean it's going to work for the next.
One thing I've learned is that every group of people have something that they hold dear to their heart, almost as like a jewel, a divine thing. And that very thing is almost would give a disgust response in other groups. Like, we all have different things that we love. Like, yeah, there's so much change. And that's one of the things I love just about, like, there's so much talk about whether you should love America or hate America. But one of the values that I fucking love about being an American is just this idea that you get to find your way. You get to be, every person is free to choose their life and what they'll be. So.
Dude, by the way, that's so incredible. And I noticed there's so many similarities also with my upbringing, which was so different than yours. But I find it so fascinating how I could still see, like, reflections of myself.
I love
in that
because because it's a human experience, right? Like,
yeah.
Like there's things that you want to take that's beautiful from your upbringing, but then there's parts that make you uniquely you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting also, like, we were talking about psychedelics. I do kind of want to give a small disclosure. I think there's, especially nowadays, this whole push, like, everyone go do psychedelics.
I'm glad you're
whatever.
making this disclosure, because I'm definitely not saying that either.
Right. Yeah. People can have really bad experiences, and it could, make things much worse. Yeah, for sure. So I actually did ayahuasca, which was an incredible experience. And then Yeah, I did shrooms twice after that, which were both really bad experiences, but very deep.
Oh
You know what I
man.
mean?
Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
lot of
dude.
work. Yeah, it's not something to treat lightly. Yeah, I would never recommend it. Like if somebody says I'm thinking of doing this, I'd want to ask them like 10 or 15 questions. Like, okay, why?
Right.
Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
What's the, and if it's like, oh, it sounds fun, and I heard Joe Rogan or somebody, or I read Stealing Fire, or some book that talks about it. I heard of Burning Man, and they wanted to do it. I'm like, no, like, because it is one of those, it can also be this
Yeah.
very earth shattering experience.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. It could mess with you. I remember like so I did ayahuasca and it was like a really fascinating, like mind opening experience. And I think also like at that point I had never tried marijuana either. So that is pretty funny. Um
That's amazing. You went into the deep end,
yeah,
Gabi.
I went into the deep end. So what happened was my piano teacher was a shaman. And
Ah,
so he invited me to a ceremony. And I was doing my master's degree in professional clinical counseling and marriage and family therapy. And basically, I was reading up about like studies about how psychedelics could be like really healing and everything. And I was like, you know what, let me just see what it does. You know, I'm very curious. So I was not expecting it at all, but I end up doing the ceremony and like, dude, I was seeing past lives. I was like
yeah,
flying, man. I
yeah.
went to the other dimension. Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty crazy.
It'll cause you to question a lot of things.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what I think is interesting also. You know, with my personal experience, I grew up traditionally Orthodox
Mm-hmm.
and Orthodox Jewish, and then I joined what's called like a yeshivish community, and you know, I kind of went and it's kind of like a monastery, honestly, in yeshiva,
Mm-hmm.
where I was basically learning and studying Talmud and Bible, and then
Mm-hmm.
prayers from literally 7:30 in the morning until like 11 p.m. at night.
That's dedication, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, and I really believed in it. And what's incredible is like it's like I still obviously believe in you know stuff from that things that I look back in and value greatly, but I don't identify with like needing to live like that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think like that push to like where I wouldn't say it's a cult and
Yeah.
more just like I guess an extreme version of living is because like I don't think there was ever you know manipulation to stay
Yeah.
or anything like that. You know it just did feel like a very intense and extreme way of living that you know they preached was the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think
Yeah.
tying back to what makes something culty or not culty, I think it's that element where somebody does not genuinely have free choice. Because you can tell somebody, I mean, that's something I even have a lot of respect for some of my friends that are Amish or ex-Amish at least. Like they have this thing when they get older where like go out, experience the world, and then make the decision. Do you want to
Right.
stay this way or do you want to live that way? And
Mhm.
and not in a like people need that. And not in a bullshit way like that I've seen from religions like mine where they're like, no, you have choice. You can choose the good choice and go to heaven or choose
Mhm.
this bad choice and go to hell. Choice is yours. It's like,
You got it right.
no, actually get to decide and have respect for the
Mhm.
choice no matter what. So,
Yeah. The interesting thing is that when you're talking about like I don't know what the word is, but like this kind of very right wing, very rigid Jewish community, you know, you kind of have the choice to let's say not dedicate your life in yeshiva, but even that is like frowned upon. And it's like if you would leave the religion altogether, you know, that would be a no go. You know,
would that damage relationships?
yeah, that would probably damage relationships.
Yeah, that's too
Probably,
bad.
yeah,
That's too
yeah.
bad.
Um, yeah, that's interesting, and I wonder, like, at what point would I say that it is a cult? You know, like,
Yeah,
what would need to be there for me to be like, "This is definitely a cult." You know what I mean? Um,
you're kind of getting
that's
there for
interesting.
me
Anyways,
because, yeah, just one quick thing on that because I talked on Anthony Padilla's show, and the whole thing wasn't put in, but he kind of asked me that question. I was like, I said, there's a few elements to it. One of them is high stakes. Like, what happens if you leave? And to me, the higher the stakes, like, that's a pretty high stake that's like, we can't be in a relationship anymore. Like if there's like, and then it can, and more culty if there's actually punishment. So maybe you can be in a relationship, that's one side of it, but at least you're not punished. Whereas like there's real punishment
Right.
psychologically and actually for leaving the religion that I'm in or that I'm from. And that's to me is what makes it culty.
Wow. You know, Calvin, I literally could have this conversation with you for another like 2 hours. This has been so insightful and
Yeah,
fascinating. I'm really happy I
it's
got to
been
sit here
fun.
with you. I kind of want to ask you one more question, and then I want to get into closing. But I want to understand, like, what is the role of comedy for you now?
You just said it. Yeah, that's what it is, man. Healing. So the reason I like performing comedy, and I'm again right now it's just hobby-ish. I've done I do open mics. I've performed in one single show where I got paid, but the reason I like it is we need to joke around this shit. We have to, like, life is so complicated and big, and if there is no sense of humor, and that's one, like, my upbringing had a lot of joking people where they think they're being funny, but genuinely zooming out and looking at it, there's no
Right.
room for humor. There is no, it is not very
Mm.
humorous. And there are certain things that I was forbidden to do when I was in the religion. One of them was to dare criticize church authority, priesthood authority.
Mhm.
Those are the leaders of the church. Like if you criticized them, again, it's a slippery slope for you damning your entire soul to hell. Something my grandfather would say is criticism of the church leaders or of the priesthood is the first step to apostasy. And again, if you apostatize, you're going to hell forever. So comedy is my way of playing with that fire. Comedy is my way of, that's at least that's where it started. It's turning into more philosophical things or observing culty stuff in the rest of society because, you know, there are pieces to it. I'm starting to think how it's more of a human thing. Like I think it's the rule more than the exception. Like the inkling to be culty. But to me, it started with me almost like facing the thing I feared most. Not public ridicule, not getting laughs, but talking about things that I was forbidden to talk about and making fun of it like in the face of it. So I'm not afraid because when I first left, I still had some of those things I had to work through. I was like, can I say something against my narcissistic leader, John Timpson, who's the main leader now? Like, can I poke fun at his fiery, like, fear-based sermons and how he like, and that was an edgy thing for me. And that has been healing. One of the most healing things, just a shout out
Incredible.
to anybody that is Mormon. If anybody's Mormon, you have to check out Crystal Moore. Crystal Moore is a comedian that, a big thing in Mormonism, Mormons will know this if they're listening. There's this thing called General Conference. General Conference happens twice a year in regular LDS circles where they get together and they're hearing the direct word of God for that entire weekend. Crystal Moore, an ex-Mormon of the LDS Church, she puts on a show called the Jack Mormon Comedy Hour. It's usually the same weekend as General Conference, and it's a bunch of Mormons, ex-Mormons, getting together and just having laughs, making fun of all this bullshit that we believed in. And that, like, when I did that, I performed in her show, and that was the most healing night of my life. It was like 3 years of therapy in a single night. So shout out to Crystal Moore, Jack Mormon Comedy Hour, for that. But yeah, and again, it's still new. I like challenging myself. I'm getting more and more into this thing of like, if I really got one life, and again, ayahuasca, it points to things that, like, I had experiences that led me to think, oh, maybe there was a past life, maybe there's something else. But I also am rational enough to be like, the brain comes up with stories, and I don't know if that's just me filling in gaps, and it's hard to imagine non-existing. Right. And so I want to not squander the opportunity I have more than anything, realizing there is this life. And so I want to continue to challenge myself and push myself and have experiences. And so comedy is one of those things that is helping me do that.
That's so cool, man. And I'm happy for you. And I'm also really happy we had this conversation.
Yeah,
We
likewise,
definitely got to do a part 2
Totally open
because
to
I
it.
feel like I want to go. Yeah,
Yeah, comedy's
for
since
sure. I want to go so much deeper on these topics.
comedy's fun too because I was like, just
What's
the
up?
final thing I was gonna say on comedy. The thing I also love about it is it's so something I would have never considered ever doing, like especially growing up on a farm.
Okay.
Like we lived on a farm, you know. I milked a cow every morning, gardening, and then construction stuff with the hand. Like the idea of just being playful and doing something entertaining, it seems so ridiculous to me. And I want to play more in like that space of just ridiculousness and not taking life so goddamn seriously all the time.
Yeah, man. I mean, that is hilarious, by
Yeah.
the way. You know? Your upbringing is like, obviously, like it was like sad and tragic in many ways, but like it's hilarious. I'm
No,
sure
and
it's
it should be played with. It's like, here's the paradox of my
right.
existence. I don't believe in anything of where I'm from. Like, I think Joseph Smith lied a lot of shit to create it. And yet, what's really funny, it gave me life. Like, I wouldn't even be here if my dad wasn't a polygamist and had 45 kids. Like, that's a cosmic ridiculousness. Like, that's wild. That's
is
so
crazy, right?
crazy. Like, if my dad believed the same way I believed, I wouldn't even be born. Like, that's wild. And so I have to find a way to be like grateful for it because it brought me into this world. And at the same time be like, well, we all come from like things that, like if you go back far enough, that we're not necessarily proud of. And it's all about like, well, what are you going to do with it now? So yeah, we got to play with it.
For sure. Calvin, if there's one thing that you can yell from the rooftops that if everyone was listening right now, you would want them to know, what would that be?
One life, baby. Really fill into that. One life. There's this stoic, I don't know how to say the exact word, but I think it's something called amara fati or something. It's just this realization of reflecting on your own mortality. Like, even if you believe in the afterlife, I think it is helpful to imagine that this is it, because it crystallizes and clarifies so much. I've seen so many people play so safe, afraid of making a mistake or something because they think they're acting like this is going to happen over and over, and there's a lot of belief systems as that. But again, what do you know more than anything? You like, humans are made to believe in stories. I mean, the way I define religions or belief systems is like, what is the difference between this faith and this faith? It's a collection of stories. They believe in this collection of stories. They believe in this collection of stories. Fundamentalist Mormon groups, they believe in certain collections of stories. Like, we are storytelling, meaning-making machines. But when we get down to what we know for sure, we know we are right here, right now. And so if there's a message I would just tell anybody, like, I'm so fine with what anybody believes. I want you to believe it if it gives you joy and Bible, and if it's truly from you. I care way less about what somebody believes, but I do care way more about why they believe it and how they got to it. And so just remembering that we got this one life, that's the one we know more than anything. If you really play in that and consider that, what are you going to do with it from this point forward? We can't control the past, but we're holding the pen now of our life. What's the plot twist? What's the story we want to write now? What would you write? Like, just really getting people to see that like the empowerment in that you're holding the pen of the rest of your life, and this might be the only one you've got. What are you going to do? Even if there is something else, what are you going to do with this one? So, one life, baby.
Kevin, that's beautiful, man. And I'm hearing the wisdom and the honesty and sincerity, and that's so like incredible. And it's great that there are people like you, and being able to share this truth and this wisdom. And I'm really honored that I had the ability to have this conversation with you. And I'm really excited for part 2.
Yeah, me too. And we'll have to get a beer or something at some point here in New York.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Absolutely. I'd be down. Anyways, obviously, links to your YouTube and Instagram will be in the description. Check out Calvin. It was incredible. Anything else you might want to tell the audience?
Yeah, my podcast, my YouTube podcast, Cultured Pod. You can find that on Spotify, or if you just search my name, Calvin Wayman, on YouTube or Spotify, or Instagram. That's probably the best way to follow as well. So yeah, Calvin Wayman for people want to follow the pod.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you for listening, guys. We love you. See you soon.